Over 100 years ago, a street in downtown Hartford, Connecticut, was extended through Capitol Avenue up to Bushnell Park. In the process, a block of Victorian row houses was split in half. Several historic buildings, including a house once occupied by President Lincoln's Secretary of the Navy, were demolished, and right next to a small waterfall on the Park River, the city erected a stone bridge that stood for nearly a quarter century before the river here was put through an underground conduit. Hi, this is History with me, Dan Sterner. If you love Old Hartford, please hit subscribe as we explore the 1918 extension of Hudson Street. Hudson Street extends between the area of Hartford Hospital at Jefferson Street on the south to Pulaski Circle adjacent to Bushnell Park on the north. Before the Park River was placed through an underground conduit under Pulaski Circle in the 1940s, Hudson Street crossed a bridge here connecting with Wells Street to the north. The south section of Hudson Street, between Jefferson and Park Streets, was first opened through the farm of Henry Hudson back in 1844. The northern section, from Buckingham Street up to Elm Street and then across the bridge to Wells, was only constructed in 1917 to 18. In this video, let's focus on the area from Capitol Avenue to Elm and Wells. This section of a 1917 Atlas of Hartford shows the area of the proposed extension just before work began the following year. Along the north side of Capitol Avenue was a block of 8 row houses, built of brick and faced with brownstone. They were erected in 1863 by Andrew B. West, a carpenter, and Henry R. Tryon, a mason. The extension of Hudson Street plowed right through the middle of this row. This photo, taken in 1919, shows the result. The central 2 houses and part of a third were eliminated. That left 2.5 units on the west, which were later demolished and are now part of a parking lot that's currently awaiting redevelopment, and 3 more units on the east, which survive today at the corner of Capitol and Hudson. Returning to our map, just north of the row houses was an old home which stood at the west end of Linden Place, right at the corner before Linden Place made a turn northward to intersect with Elm Street. Today, Linden Place extends all the way to Hudson Street, and this entire area just east of Hudson between Capitol and Elm is a vast parking lot which is to the rear of the Central Baptist Church facing Main Street. The lost section of Linden Place once passed through the western end of this parking lot, and the house I mentioned would have stood in the southwest corner of the lot with its rear L extending into Hudson Street. So what was this house? This late 19th century photo shows the house at the bend in Linden Place. The dome of the state capitol building is in the distance on the right, and on the left is the rear of the 1863 row houses that were later cut through by Hudson Street. The house was built in about 1750 by Thomas Seymour, Esquire, who died in 1767. It was then the home of his widow, Hepzibah, and then of their son, Thomas Y. Seymour, who was the first mayor of Hartford, serving from 1784, when it was incorporated as a city, until he resigned in 1812. Before that, in 1793, Mayor Seymour deeded the house to his son, Major Thomas Y. Seymour, who died in 1811. After the Seymours, the house passed to the Wells family, first Dr. Sylvester Wells, and then his son, Ralph Wells, who died in 1837. It was then the home of Gideon Wells, who later moved to Washington, D.C. to serve as Secretary of the Navy under Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. After the war, Wells returned to Hartford and lived in a house on Charter Oak Place. The old Seymour Wells house on Linden Place then had other owners before it was removed for the extension of Hudson Street. This photograph shows the house's rear L, which was the part of the building that extended into what's now Hudson Street. Just north of the Seymour Wells house, there was another house, but this one did not have to be removed for the extension. As this section of an atlas published after the work was done shows, that house and a number of other buildings north of the current Linden Place continued to exist for a few years. But in 1927 and 1928, the buildings between Hudson and Linden Place were replaced by a gas filling station and a tire service business. All of these changes reflect the redevelopment of formerly residential areas due to the impact of automobiles on the city. First, there was the extension of Hudson Street, which provided a new route down from Trumbull Street through the vicinity, which bypassed the congestion on Main Street. Then, a decade later, was the arrival of a business that served the increased motor traffic. Operated by Abraham, Ray, and Nate Herrap, it was called the Super Tire Service Company and was later known as Herrap Brothers. The current noted in 1950, after the Conlin-Whitehead Highway was constructed above the buried Park River to intersect at nearby Lafayette Circle, that the Herrap Brothers found themselves running an information bureau as well as an automobile business. Travelers frequently stopped to ask, "What are some of the interesting places to see in Hartford?" and "Where shall we eat?" The business later had other owners and eventually closed in the 1980s. As I mentioned, the area behind the Central Baptist Church, extending to Hudson Street, is now a big parking lot. If you are enjoying this video, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Returning to the 1917 map and moving northward, the next building in the crosshairs of the road extension was a tenement house that had been erected 20 years earlier. This relatively more recent structure sat at the rear of a long lot owned by Bessie M. Beers and her sister Martha P. Skinner. At the front of the lot, facing Elm Street, was a house built in the 1790s. By the 19-teens, the older building was occupied by the Garrett Bookshop, operated by Garrett F. W. Blanchfield, an antiquarian who dealt in old manuscripts. Blanchfield, who'd served as sealer of weights and measures for the city of Hartford from 1920 to 22, and then as the New England manager of the Peerless Weighing Company of Detroit, died in 1933. The building stood just south of the old Elm Street Armory, which I discuss in another video. The old house was demolished when Hudson Street was extended. As I mentioned, behind it was a 3-story apartment block that housed 12 families. The Skinner sisters erected it in 1897, and instead of demolishing it, it was moved out of the way and rotated from its position facing northward to one where it would face eastward, along the west side of the newly extended Hudson Street. This required quite an engineering feat. The Current described it as the biggest house-moving job done in Hartford for years, and the project's supervising architects Rossner and Goodrich believed it was the largest ever tackled in the city because no contractors could be found in the state willing to do the job, which was instead undertaken by Nicholas Brothers of Yonkers and Mount Vernon, New York. Interestingly, this company of structural movers is still in business today in Dutchess County. Now we come to the Hudson Street Bridge, which was built to connect the extension of Hudson Street across the Park River to intersect with Wells Street. The stone bridge was built just west of an old mill dam and falls in the river. There had been a grist mill in this vicinity since the 1600s. The last mill on the site was erected by Leonard Daniels, right next to the dam on the south side of the river. As a young man, Daniels came to Hartford from Medway, Massachusetts in 1826, and about 4 years later purchased a small flour mill. In 1853, he erected a new mill along the river, repeatedly enlarging it over the years as his business grew. After his death in 1892, the Daniels mill was inherited by his nephew, Leonard C. Daniels, and his grandson, Leonard D. Fisk. The city acquired the building in 1912 and demolished it as part of a project at the time to improve the banks of the river here and in the adjacent Bushnell Park. So the Daniels Mill was already gone when the new bridge was built at the falls a few years later. Work on the bridge began in the fall of 1917, and it was opened in December 1918. The Hartford Courant reported on January 14, 1919, that the Hudson Street extension was proving popular, with nearly 1,000 vehicles a day passing over the bridge. The bridge was in existence for just about a quarter century. It was torn down in 1943 when the Park River was buried. I hope you enjoyed this video about the extension of Hudson Street in Hartford and the landmarks of old Hartford history that were in its path over a century ago. Thanks for watching.